Let's start with New York. We go on beyond that soon. But in New York City, tell us what's going on with residential, what's going on with offices. We hear a lot of stories about dramatically increased prices.
Right. First, thanks for having me, David. Good to see you. New York is really, I would say, on a tremendous rebound post-COVID. I would say everyone really thought we'd be fully back to the office, back to everything exciting in New York right after New Year's. With the variant, I think that got delayed a little bit, but it seems to be blowing its way through the city. And certainly I can tell you on the office side, our tenants are all planning for real return back to work, whatever that new definition is, sometime in the month of February. And I think that's very, very positive. We've got double-digit increases of occupancy, people actually showing up to the office week over week. And so I think that's a very positive trend. In terms of the city overall, you've definitely seen people who had left during COVID come back. Apartment buildings that went down in terms of occupancy to 80% roughly are now back to 98, 99%. In our buildings, we're essentially full at rents, even higher than pre-COVID. So that's been a tremendous bounce back because we were down to that roughly 80% number in concessions and so on. And so that's been a tremendous, rebound. On the for sale condominium side, New York City had its best for sale year since 2007. So I think, again, showing that resilience of the market and back to the city. There was something like 17,000 apartments that traded hands last year. As I said, the biggest increase since the biggest sales volume since 2007. So I think the city's feeling pretty vibrant. Almost all parts of the city, if you try to go out to a restaurant, while again, there was a dip in January, it seems to me now things are busy again. The streets are busy, traffic's back. It feels good. I'd say the only areas that feel kind of quiet to me are really true commercial districts in Midtown a little bit. Here at Hudson Yards, it's very vibrant if you're outside. Feels great. I went for a run in the park this morning. It was packed. And so all the things that we love about New York seem to be kind of back in place, and I'm feeling good.
Jeff, on the commercial front, you say that you are getting back into full occupancy. Are you repurposing some of that? Because we certainly read stories about, particularly in the retail area, that there's not the same demand for space. Are you having to repurpose some of your commercial space?
Yeah, well, actually, we're repurposing, as you said. Retail has probably suffered the most of all the asset classes. At Hudson Yards, I think, we built a 7-level retail center that was anchored by Neiman Marcus. And when Neiman's filed bankruptcy, instead of trying to re-tenant that for retail, we decided to repurpose that to office. And so we are in the process of converting and creating about 400,000 feet of new office space at Hudson Yards to deal with the increased demand that we're seeing from actually mostly a lot of it from tenants that are in place today that are growing and expanding. And so while the office occupancy might be kind of in the mid-30s, or I think we hit 40% day in and day out today, companies are thinking forward beyond kind of that full return to the office and making the decision to take even more space. And so we're feeling pretty optimistic about the office side. And like you said, I think there will be some conversions where possible away from uses that are not quite as valuable anymore, retail being the top one.
There's a lot of focus on real estate right now from the investor side right now because of inflation and efforts by the Fed now increasingly through 2022, it looks like, to try to fight that inflation. Where do you see the rates going in terms of rental rates, whether it's commercial or private residential? Where are they going this year? And is it possible that by raising the rates by the Fed, it'll make things worse because it'll discourage new construction?
Right. So there's actually an interesting dynamic happening as people talk about inflation in real estate. Normally what the typical response to inflation would be rents are going to rise along with inflation, which I do think will happen. But then often you'll hear that the demanded rates of return would rise, decreasing the value of the buildings. But actually what we're seeing is there's such a flow of capital looking for stable cash flow returns into the real estate asset sector today that I actually think this is going to be one of those points in history where it might be counterintuitive, but I do think cap rates are going to go down as interest rates go up. And that if you look in any real estate textbook, that's probably not what you hear, but that's what I think is going to happen, driven by all the cash that's coming into the sector today, looking for steady, recurring cash flow returns.
You at Related have a very substantial presence in the New York area. At the same time, we've seen a lot of people move away, both businesses and individuals. You also have presence in some other places. Are you reshifting your business to some of the places that are hot right now as opposed to New York City?
Right. Well, as you know, I mean, historically, we've focused on the large urban centers in this country: New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Boston, DC. And you might historically have called those tier one markets. And the cities that we might have called secondary or tier two, and they could be Charlotte, Austin, Nashville, West Palm Beach. Those cities are actually growing much greater and much faster rates than kind of the traditional urban core markets. And so we have shifted into those previously second tier cities, which may quickly become first tier cities. And we are taking advantage of the growth in those markets and have opened offices and expanded. As you know, we have a big presence in Florida, in both Miami and West Palm Beach. We've built new office buildings, and we've seen tremendous demand. A lot of it, I guess you could say, unfortunately, coming from New York. Fortunately, we're on the other side. But I actually don't see many people closing up shop from New York and moving altogether to these other markets. What you're seeing is often a second office, an opportunity for people that want to live in Florida to work out of their second office in that location. And so the offices are often smaller in West Palm Beach or Miami, and they're a supplement to kind of their headquarters. We do think there's great opportunity in those markets.
Jeff, finally, I want to talk about clean energy infrastructure, because I know that's something that's really important to you, and you're investing a lot in and Related. Tell us about what that's going to do to real estate over the longer term.
So we, a couple of years ago, set out, we created a separate company called Energy RE to focus on renewable energy development generation. And just at the end of last year, we were awarded what will ultimately be the largest renewable energy project ever built in the U.S. And so we're going to build upstate New York 25 utility scale wind and solar projects and build a 200-mile transmission line to bring that renewable energy into New York City and really clean up the grid in New York City. Because the problem that we have here is that the grid that provides the electricity to our buildings in New York City is driven today 80% by fossil fuels and only 20% by renewables. And the problem is you really can't build these renewables within the city center. And the traditional grid that would bring power here was too congested to carry. So that's why we're adding new infrastructure, new transmission lines. We'll build those renewables upstate. This is an $11 billion project that will ultimately provide 16% of the energy for all of New York City. And it's really all New York, all renewable power, and really change kind of the makeup of how power is provided to all of our buildings in New York City. So we're very excited about the opportunity. We brought on a great team to help us really grow that business, and we'll look to replicate that in cities all across the United States.